The man waited until everyone walked away from the casket. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a sealed envelope, and put it in my hand like he'd been carrying it for years. "I'm sorry," he said, "but you deserve the truth." Inside was a DNA test. 2 names, mine, and a girl named Devon, my age, same father. But here's the part that broke me completely. Devon had voicemails of my father laughing, saying, "I love you, baby girl," without hesitation. My father, the same man who sat across from me at every birthday dinner like I was a stranger he was obligated to feed, had been someone else's devoted dad this whole time. The warmth I spent my entire childhood begging for, he was giving it away freely. Just never to me. The man waited until everyone walked away from the casket. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a sealed envelope, and put it in my hand like he'd been carrying it for years. "I'm sorry," he said, "but you deserve the truth." Inside was a DNA test, 2 names, mine, and a girl named Devon, my age, same father. But here's the part that broke me completely. Devon had voicemails of my father laughing, saying, "I love you, baby girl," without hesitation. My father, the same man who sat across from me at every birthday dinner like I was a stranger he was obligated to feed, had been someone else's devoted dad this whole time. The warmth I spent my entire childhood begging for, he was giving it away freely, just never to me. My name is Cassie. I'm 37 years old, and I buried my father on a Tuesday in November in a small cemetery outside of Columbus, Ohio, under a sky so gray it looked like the world itself had given up. I want to be honest with you. I did not cry at his funeral, not one tear. I stood there in my black coat, holding a program with his photo on it, and I felt nothing. Just this hollow, echoing kind of quiet inside my chest. The kind of quiet that comes not from peace, but from years of trying to feel something for a man who never made it easy. My father, Gerald Hutchins, was 64 years old when he died. Heart attack. Quick. The doctors said he probably didn't even feel it coming. I remember thinking, when my aunt called me with the news, that I didn't know whether to feel sad or relieved or just finished. Like a chapter of a book I never wanted to read had finally closed on its own. He wasn't a cruel man. That's the thing people don't understand about fathers like him. He never hit us, never screamed. He just wasn't there, even when he was sitting right in front of you. He had this way of looking through you, like you were a window and the thing he actually wanted to see was somewhere on the other side. I spent so much of my childhood trying to get through that glass. The funeral was small, maybe 40 people. My mother, Renee, sat in the front row with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly composed, the way she had been perfectly composed through 39 years of marriage. My younger brother, Todd, stood beside her, doing that thing he always does, holding everyone together, making sure nobody needs anything, being the person our family always needed our father to be. I stood slightly apart from them. That felt right. That felt honest. It was after the burial, when people had started drifting toward their cars, when the funeral home staff began doing whatever funeral home staff do after everyone leaves. That's when I noticed him. He was standing near the edge of the cemetery, just past the tree line. A man I had never seen before in my life, maybe late 40s, dark coat. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even pretending to grieve. He was just watching me. Specifically. Not my mother. Not Todd. Me. Something cold moved through my chest that had nothing to do with the November air. He waited until I was completely alone. Then he walked toward me with the kind of calm that told me he had rehearsed this moment many times. He stopped 2 feet away and said, "You're Cassie, Gerald's daughter." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said slowly. He reached into his coat, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it in my hand like he was delivering something long overdue. "My name is Warren," he said quietly. "I was your father's attorney. Private work, nothing your family knew about." He paused. "Gerald asked me to give you this after he was gone. He couldn't do it himself. He didn't have the courage." Warren looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite guilt. "I'm sorry, Cassie. I genuinely am." Then he turned and walked back toward the tree line. And I stood there alone in that cemetery, holding an envelope with my name written on it in my father's handwriting, while the last of the funeral guests pulled out of the parking lot behind me. I didn't open it right away. I wasn't ready. I sat in my car for a long time before I touched that envelope again. The cemetery had emptied completely by then. Even the funeral home staff was gone. It was just me, parked crookedly near the exit gate, engine off, heat fading, staring at my own name written in my father's handwriting on a plain white envelope. His handwriting was small and careful, controlled. Even in this, he was controlled. I held it in both hands like it might break, or like it might break me. My phone was buzzing. Todd, probably. My mother, maybe. I turned it face down on the passenger seat, and I just sat there, breathing, watching the bare November trees through the windshield like they had some answer I needed. I have this thing I do when I'm scared. I go very still. I always have. When I was 9 years old and heard my parents fighting behind their closed bedroom door, I didn't run to my room or press my ear against the wall like other kids might. I just sat at the kitchen table, very still, staring at my cereal going soft in the milk, waiting for the world to tell me what was happening. I was doing that now, 37 years old, sitting in a cold car, going very still. Finally, I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a single folded document and a small photograph, face down. I unfolded the document first. It was a DNA test, official, lab certified, the kind you can't argue with. 2 names at the top. Mine, Cassandra Lynn Hutchins. And below it, Devin Marie Caldwell, age 27. Paternal match, 99.98%. I read it 3 times, then a fourth. The words didn't change, the numbers didn't move. My father's name was printed clearly in the middle of that page, connecting us both like a bridge I had never known existed. I had a sister, a half-sister, 27 years old, 10 years younger than me. Which meant that while I was in middle school, while I was trying to figure out why my father looked at me like I exhausted him just by being in the room, he was somewhere else starting over, building something new, making another child. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the photograph. I turned it over. She had his eyes. That was the first thing I noticed, and I wish I hadn't, because it made her immediately, devastatingly real. Not a name on a document anymore. A person. A young woman with dark eyes, exactly like the ones I had spent my whole life trying to read, trying to reach, trying to understand. She was smiling in the photo, a real smile. Open, unguarded, the kind that means the person holding the camera is someone you completely trust. On the back of the photograph, in that same small, careful handwriting, my father had written 4 words. She knows about you. I put the photo down on the passenger seat. I pressed both hands flat against my thighs. And I did something I had not done in years. Not at his hospital bedside, not when my aunt called me with the news, not once during that entire funeral. I cried, not pretty crying, not the kind you see in movies where a single graceful tear slides down someone's cheek. I'm talking about the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep and so old that it almost doesn't feel like grief anymore. It feels like finally, like something that has been locked inside your ribcage for decades has just been handed permission to exist. I cried for the little girl who used to wait by the window when his car pulled into the driveway, hoping that today would be the day he came inside and actually saw her. I cried for every birthday he sat through like an obligation, every school play he watched with his arms crossed, every time I reached for him and felt nothing reach back. I cried because somewhere out there was a 27-year-old woman with his eyes who had apparently gotten everything I never did. And I cried because written on the back of her photograph were 4 words that told me this secret had been held, deliberately, carefully, with intention, until he was safely in the ground and couldn't face what it cost me. She knows about you, he told her. He told Devin I existed. He just never found the courage to tell me about her. I drove home on autopilot. I don't remember traffic lights. I don't remember turns. I just remember suddenly being parked outside my apartment building in Columbus, engine still running, the DNA test folded on the passenger seat next to Devin's photograph, and my brain doing this thing where it was pulling up memories I hadn't touched in years, dusting them off, turning them over, looking at them now with completely different eyes. Because that's what a truth like this does. It doesn't just change the present. It goes back and rewrites everything that already happened. I was 12 years old the first time I understood that something in our house was deeply, quietly wrong. It was a Sunday night in late summer. I remember because the windows were open and I could smell cut grass from the neighbor's yard. My parents thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I was sitting at the top of the stairs in the dark, the way kids do when they sense something grown and heavy moving through the house below them. My mother's voice floated up first, low, tight, the voice she used when she was trying not to become something she couldn't take back. I know about her, Gerald. I have known for a long time. Silence from my father. The specific kind of silence he was masterful at. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the silence of someone who has decided you don't deserve an answer. Then my mother again, quieter now, almost defeated. I just need you to tell me it's over. I didn't hear what came next. My father said something low and even, and the conversation just stopped. No explosion, no slamming doors, nothing dramatic. Just that terrible, trained quiet that our family did so well settling back over the house like a blanket over a fire. I went back to my room and I told myself I had misheard. I was 12. I needed that to be true. But sitting in my car outside my apartment building 25 years later, I understood that I had heard every single word perfectly. My mother had known, not suspected, known, and she had stood in that kitchen and asked my father for the smallest, most desperate thing. Just tell me it's over. And he had given her his silence instead of the truth. And then life continued. Breakfast was made, lunches were packed. My father went on his business trips and came home smelling like a different city, and my mother set his dinner plate at the head of the table every single night without fail. I remembered other things now. Sharp, specific things that I had filed away under the wrong labels for decades. The summer I was 15, my father got a phone call during our family vacation in Myrtle Beach. He stepped outside onto the motel balcony and was gone for 40 minutes. When he came back inside, his whole face had changed. Softer somehow, lighter, like whoever was on that phone had handed him back some version of himself he didn't get to be with us. I noticed. I always noticed. I just didn't have the right word for what I was seeing. I had the word now. Relief. He felt relief talking to her. To them. To that other life he was running parallel to ours like a second train on a hidden track. And there was one more memory. The worst one. The one I had buried deepest. I was 19, home from my first semester of college. My father and I were alone in the kitchen. My mother had gone to bed early. Todd was out with friends. It was one of the rare moments where it was just the two of us, and I remember thinking this was my chance. My actual chance to finally reach him. I asked him something I had never asked before. I said, "Dad, do you ever feel like you missed out? On us, I mean. On being here more." He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched something move across his face. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that knew. Then he looked back down at his coffee cup and said, "You turned out fine, Cassie. You didn't need me the way you think you did." I had carried those words like a wound for 18 years. You didn't need me the way you think you did. But now, sitting in that car, holding a DNA test, staring at a photograph of a girl with his eyes, I finally understood what he was really saying in that kitchen. He wasn't telling me I was strong enough without him. He was telling me he had already given everything he had to give. Just not to me. It took me 3 days to contact Devin. 3 days of picking up my phone, finding her number. Warren, the attorney, had included it in the envelope, neatly printed on a small card like this was a normal introduction, and then putting my phone back down. 3 days of going to work at my accounting firm, sitting at my desk, staring at spreadsheets while my brain ran a completely different calculation underneath. 3 days of not telling my mother, not telling Todd, not telling anyone. Because once I made that call, there was no version of my family that stayed the same. I knew that. I was just trying to figure out if I was ready for it. On the third night, I poured myself a glass of wine I didn't finish, sat down on my couch, and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. She picked up on the second ring. "Cassie?" Her voice was young, careful, like she had been waiting for this call and dreading it equally. "Yeah," I said. "It's me." Silence for a moment, then she exhaled, this long, shaky breath that told me she had been holding it for days too. "I didn't know if you'd call," Devin said. "I almost didn't," I told her. Because she deserved honesty from the start. We had already inherited enough secrets. We talked for 2 hours that first night. Carefully at first, circling each other the way you do when you're trying to figure out if someone is safe. She was 27, living in Indianapolis. She worked as a graphic designer. She had grown up with her mother, a woman named Sandra Caldwell, in a suburb 40 minutes outside of Indianapolis. And our father, Gerald Hutchins, the same quiet, distant man I had spent my childhood trying to reach, had been a regular, present, involved part of her life since she was born. Every other weekend. Holidays rotated. He attended her high school graduation. He helped her move into her college dorm. He called her every Sunday morning without fail. Every Sunday morning. I used to call my father on Sunday mornings sometimes. It would ring 4 or 5 times and go to voicemail, and I would leave some cheerful, low-maintenance message. Just checking in, Dad. Hope you're good. And he would text back hours later with, all good. Busy week ahead. He was busy. He was on the phone with her. Did you know about us? I asked Devin. About me and my brother and my mom? Yes, she said quietly. My mom told me when I was old enough to understand. She said your dad had a family before her, that you existed, that he loved you. Something sharp moved through my chest at that. He told you he loved us? Yes, Devin said. And then, after a pause that felt like she was choosing her next words very carefully, Cassie, he talked about you specifically. He said you were the smartest person he knew. He said you reminded him of himself and that it scared him. I had to put the phone down for a moment. I pressed it against my collarbone, and I stared at my ceiling, and I breathed. Because that was somehow worse than if she had told me he never mentioned me at all. He knew exactly who I was. He saw me completely. He was just too much of a coward to let me see him back. When I brought the phone back up, I asked the question I had been building toward all night. Devin, do you have voicemails? From him? Another pause, longer this time. Yes, she said softly. What does he sound like? My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated it, and I didn't try to hide it. I heard her breathing on the other end. And then she said, he sounds like a dad, Cassie. He just sounds like somebody's dad. And there it was. The thing I had been circling for 3 days, for 37 years, my whole entire life, finally said out loud by the one person on earth who understood exactly what those words cost me to hear. We agreed to meet the following Saturday. A coffee shop in Indianapolis, halfway between our lives. Neutral ground. I said okay, and we hung up and I sat in the silence of my apartment for a long time. My father had told Devin I was the smartest person he knew. He just never once told me. The coffee shop in Indianapolis was small and warm and smelled like cinnamon and ground espresso. I got there 20 minutes early because I needed to already be seated when she walked in. I needed that small advantage of watching her arrive rather than being watched. I ordered a black coffee I didn't drink, and I sat facing the door. She walked in at exactly 11 o'clock. And I know this sounds strange. I know it probably shouldn't have felt this way. But the moment I saw Devin Caldwell walk through that door, something in my chest did this quiet, painful thing that I still don't have a clean word for. Because she looked like family. Not in a dramatic, obvious way. Just in that subtle, cellular way that your body recognizes before your brain catches up. The way she held her shoulders, the angle of her jaw. Those eyes, his eyes, warm and careful, and carrying something heavy behind them. She spotted me immediately. She stood still for just a second in the doorway. Then she walked over and sat down across from me, and we looked at each other for a moment without saying anything. Two women sitting across from each other in a coffee shop in Indianapolis, bound together by a man who had failed us both in completely different ways. You look like him, I said finally. I hadn't planned to say that first. So do you, she said, around the eyes. I hadn't known that. Nobody had ever said that to me before. We talked for 4 hours. The coffee shop emptied and refilled around us, and we barely noticed. She told me about growing up, the good parts and the complicated parts. Because it wasn't a perfect story on her end either. Our father being present didn't mean he was easy. He was still controlled, still emotionally guarded in that particular way he had. Still the man who showed up but kept a wall of glass between himself and real intimacy. But he showed up. That was the part I couldn't get past. He showed up for her in ways he never once showed up for me, and I needed to sit with that truth without letting it swallow me whole. Then she pulled out her phone. I want to show you something, she said carefully. You can say no. I won't be offended. She turned the screen toward me. It was a voicemail, saved. His name on the contact, Dad, with a small heart emoji next to it that made my stomach drop. She pressed play. And I heard my father's voice. Not the clipped, distracted voice I knew from my Sunday morning calls. Not the voice that said, you turned out fine, Cassie, like I was a project he had completed. This was a different voice entirely. Relaxed, warm, almost unrecognizable in its softness. Hey baby girl, just calling to hear your voice. Call me back when you get a chance. Love you. So proud of you, you know that. 11 seconds. 11 seconds of my father being someone I had never met. I handed the phone back to Devin very carefully, like it was something breakable. She was watching me with those eyes, his eyes, full of something that looked like guilt, even though none of this was her fault. None of it. She was as much a victim of his choices as I was, just a different kind of victim. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Don't be, I said, and I meant it. He's the one who should be sorry. We sat with that for a moment. Then I asked her something I hadn't planned to ask. Something that had been sitting in the back of my mind since our phone call 3 nights ago. Did he ever explain it to you? Why he kept us separate? Why he never told me about you? Devin looked down at her coffee cup. She was quiet for long enough that I thought she might not answer. He said he didn't know how to be the person he was with me inside the life he had with you, she finally said. He said he had built 2 boxes and he didn't know how to open both of them at once without everything falling out. 2 boxes. That's what we were to him. 2 separate boxes he kept on separate shelves, so he never had to look at both of them at the same time. I thought about my mother. 39 years of marriage. 39 years of setting his dinner plate at the head of the table, ironing his shirts, keeping his house, raising his children, while he kept a whole separate box 40 minutes outside of Indianapolis, and suddenly I needed to go home. I needed to look my mother in the eyes. Because Devin hadn't said anything new about my father tonight. Everything she told me just confirmed what I already understood. He was a coward who loved selectively and called it complicated. But my mother had stood in that kitchen when I was 12 years old and said, I know about her, Gerald. And then she had made breakfast the next morning, like nothing happened. She knew, she had always known, and she had chosen to protect the secret instead of her daughter. I drove to my mother's house that same evening. The whole 2 hours back from Indianapolis, I rehearsed what I would say. Calm, measured sentences, reasonable questions. I was going to be an adult about this. I was going to give her space to explain. I had it all mapped out in my head the way I map out everything. Clean, logical, controlled. I pulled into her driveway and sat there for a moment looking at the house I grew up in. The white shutters, the porch light she always leaves on. The rose bushes along the front walk that she tends every spring like they are the one thing in her life she can actually control. This house had always looked like a normal house from the outside. That was the whole point. That was the entire project. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. That felt important. My mother, Renee Hutchins, opened the door in her robe with a cup of tea in her hand, and when she saw my face, she knew. I watched the recognition move through her eyes like a current. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just stepped back and let me in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where I had eaten 10,000 breakfasts and done my homework and once, at age 12, sat very still staring at cereal going soft in the milk while her marriage quietly bled out in the room above me. I put the DNA test on the table between us. She looked at it. She didn't touch it. How long have you known? I asked. She wrapped both hands around her teacup. Cassie, how long, Mom? She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice stayed even, controlled. Always so controlled. I suspected when you were about 8. I knew for certain when you were 12. 12. The summer night with the open windows and the smell of cut grass and her voice saying, I know about her, Gerald. 25 years, I said. The words felt like stones dropping onto the table between us. You knew for 25 years and you never told me. I was protecting this family. You were protecting yourself. I hadn't meant to say it that sharply, but I also wasn't sorry. You were protecting the house and the marriage and the version of your life that you could live with. Don't call that protecting your family, Mom. That's not what that was. She flinched, just slightly. Then she straightened. You don't know what it was like, she said quietly. You don't know what I gave up to keep this family together. What I swallowed every single day so that you and Todd had a stable home, a father in the house, so that you didn't grow up in a broken family. We grew up in a broken family, I said. We just didn't know it had a crack running straight through the middle of it. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something behind her eyes that wasn't defensiveness or guilt. It was grief, old, waterlogged grief that had been sitting in her chest for 25 years with nowhere to go, and I felt something shift in me. Not forgiveness. I wasn't anywhere near forgiveness. But understanding. The terrible, unwanted kind that makes you angrier because it takes away the clean simplicity of just being able to hate someone. My mother had been betrayed too. She had just handled her betrayal by turning it inward, by swallowing it whole, by making herself smaller and quieter until she disappeared into the role of wife and pretended the wound wasn't there. But here was the thing I could not move past. The thing that sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't dislodge. I was 12 years old, I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. I was sitting at the top of those stairs, and I heard everything. And the next morning you made pancakes, and you packed my lunch, and you acted like nothing had happened. And I spent the next 25 years thinking I had imagined it, thinking I was crazy for feeling like something in this house was wrong. I stopped, breathed. You let me think I was imagining it, Mom. That's what I can't forgive right now. Not the secret, not even protecting your marriage. You let me doubt my own reality for 25 years. The kitchen was completely silent. My mother set her teacup down very carefully, and then she did something I had not seen her do since I was a small child. She put her face in her hands and she cried, not the composed, dignified kind of crying she had performed at the funeral. Real crying, broken, ugly, long overdue crying. I didn't reach for her. I wanted to. Some deep childhood part of me wanted to reach across that table and tell her it was okay, the way I had always made things okay, the way I had always been the one to smooth things over and keep the peace and ask for less than I needed so nobody had to be uncomfortable. I kept my hands flat on the table. Because it was not okay. And I was done pretending it was. I stood up after a while. I picked up the DNA test. I told her I needed time and space and that I loved her, but that right now, love and trust were two very different things, and I only had one of them to offer. Then I walked out of that kitchen. And I didn't look back at the house when I pulled out of the driveway. I was done performing fine for people who had never once performed it for me. The inheritance papers arrived 11 days later. My father's attorney, the official one, not Warren, sent them by certified mail, a thick envelope that sat on my kitchen counter for a full morning before I opened it, because I had learned, in the past 2 weeks, that envelopes containing my father's intentions required a certain amount of emotional preparation. I made coffee. I sat down. I opened it. The will had been updated 14 months before he died. Quietly, privately, the way my father did everything that mattered to him. The house went to my mother. A modest amount was divided between me and Todd. Standard, expected, nothing that surprised me. And then there was a separate trust, already established, already funded, set up specifically for Devin Marie Caldwell 18 months ago, 2 months before he updated the will. A trust for her continued education, professional development, and future security, carefully structured, thoughtfully executed. Planned. He had planned for her future. I sat with that for a long time. Here is what I want to tell you, because I think this is the part that matters most, the part that is hardest to explain to someone who hasn't lived inside a story like this one. The money itself didn't destroy me. We're not talking about a fortune. We're talking about a modest trust fund from a middle-class man in Columbus, Ohio. What destroyed me, quietly, completely, was the planning, the intention behind it. Because my father was not a spontaneous man. He did not do things without thought. Every decision he made was deliberate and considered, which meant that trust fund for Devin wasn't guilt. It wasn't obligation. It was love in the only language my father actually spoke fluently. Provision, structure, future building. He had sat down with an attorney and said, I want to make sure she is taken care of after I'm gone. He had never once sat down and asked me what I needed. I called Devin that evening, not to talk about the money. She already knew about the trust, he had told her himself, but because she was the only person in my life right now who understood the specific geography of this grief, the way it had so many layers. The way you could be furious at a dead man and also desperately wish you could have known the version of him that existed somewhere else. How are you doing? She asked when she picked up. And she said it the way someone says it when they actually want to know. I'm figuring it out, I said. You? Same, she said quietly. We talked for an hour, easy and careful and honest. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized something that I hadn't expected to find on the other side of all this devastation. I liked her. Genuinely, simply liked her. Not because she owed me anything or I owed her anything. Not because we were supposed to bond over shared trauma. Just because she was a thoughtful, honest, warm person who had also been handed an incomplete version of our father and had also spent years trying to make sense of the gaps he left behind. He had failed us both, just differently, just in ways that were specific to what each of us needed most and never got. I went back to therapy the following week. I had gone years ago, briefly, and stopped when I convinced myself I was fine. I was not fine. I had never been fine. I had just been very, very good at performing fine for an audience that needed me to be okay, so they didn't have to examine why I wasn't. My therapist is a woman named Dr. Okafor. In our third session, she said something that cracked something open in me in the best possible way. She said, "Cassie, you spent your whole life trying to earn love from someone who had already decided where his love was going. That was never about your worth. That was about his limitations." I wrote that down when I got home. I taped it to my bathroom mirror. I read it every morning. I am still angry. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't want to wrap this up too neatly because that would be a lie, and I have had enough of lies to last me several lifetimes. I am still angry at my father for being a coward. I am still angry at my mother for choosing silence over her daughter's reality. I am still in the slow, uncomfortable process of figuring out what my relationship with her looks like now, what I can offer, and what I need to protect. But I am also still talking to Devin. We text a few times a week. Nothing dramatic. She'll send me a funny meme. I'll ask about a project she's working on. Small, ordinary things that are building something neither of us expected to find when a stranger handed me an envelope at a cemetery in November. My father gave us nothing on purpose, but we found each other anyway. And that, the one real, living, breathing thing that came out of all his careful secrets, belongs entirely to us, not to him, not to his choices, not to his cowardice. To us. I don't know yet what kind of woman I am becoming on the other side of this. I just know that for the first time in 37 years, I am not performing okayness for anyone. I am not making myself smaller so someone else doesn't have to examine their own failures. I am not waiting by any window for anyone. I am just here, in my own life, finally taking up the space I was always supposed to occupy. And for right now, for today, that is more than enough.